Welcome to Revlog, where this week we come to the final chapter of Galatians.
Yes.
Yeah, we've still got a couple of weeks, but it's the final chapter of Galatians. And
I would like to say that it is still cold.
It is still cold.
This week.
That's right. Do you need
so much so that I wore the same outfit. I wore the same.
Yes.
Bless your
It is cold. And the two of you are warming yourselves with coffee, I
Yes,
see?
except mine has achieved room temperature.
You know, I'm not much of a coffee drinker, so I don't really have a warm drink.
This is hot water.
That's hot water?
Hot water,
Yes,
yeah.
you're on the hot water.
It's very, very weak coffee. Very weak.
With as much coffee as is on the sides of my cup, it really does create a weak blend.
I have cups like that too. You need to get some hot chocolate or something. Hot tea
I
or
will. I will
something.
drink some hot chocolate occasionally.
You need to bring it on this podcast.
Yeah.
That's true. I do. Maybe next time. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. Thank you. And it's cold up here where we film.
Can you
too.
run in place right here? Warm up.
But I do. I feel like y'all are taking care of me here. Y'all are doing good.
We're doing what we can, Chris.
We can.
Thank you. So, Brian, we come to Galatians 6.
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Paul encouraged us to love and warm one another in this way here in the text.
Be warm and filled, Brian. Be warm and filled.
I feel it.
What's your initial reaction to Galatians 6?
I love this this part of Galatians, and it is warm to me. I mean, Paul. And let me just say this: there are a couple of times, and there's one place I think that he does this earlier, but he always has he's got such a scholarly bent, but he always takes some time to be very warm in his letters, and I love that. It's not just, the flow chart of how things work, with the theological system. It's also the warmth. And that's important too, the systematic theology.
And I think the warmth is found in the interpersonal relationships that you can sense in this text. Right?
That is exactly...
It's how this is lived out between brother to brother.
Yes, it is not in the abstract.
No.
It is actually, these are people that I know and love, and here's how he...
And he's picturing individuals as he's writing this, right? He knows them intimately. And this isn't a group of people he doesn't know,
right?
I mean, he's speaking to individuals,
right? It's not an icy remove. It's really up close and personal, and I love that. He does say here that he sort of says what you. Well, he does say, not sort of. He says what you sow, you will reap, and it reminds me of the Old Testament saying, "Those who worship idols will become like them." And I'm moving on from Paul's warmth here. This is not a follow-on to that, but that part where Paul says, "You will reap what you sow." There is this reality at work that says we are very sensitive to spiritual formation, and we will be spiritually formed by what we're near. And if we're near, if we pursue love, if we pursue intimacy, if we pursue tenderness, all of these things that are, and goodness and faithfulness, the fruit of the Spirit and so forth, and people who practice these things, if we seek to be near them, we will be formed by that proximity. And it's just exactly like those who worship idols will become like them: deaf, mute, blind, unfeeling, and so forth. And I think that's why, and this comes back around then to the tenderness. This is why we need to be near one another and growing in brotherly, sisterly connection with one another, like Paul does present in his letters.
Yeah, in that way, he starts this chapter saying, you do have to correct one another, but when you correct in gentleness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And your care for one another. So, Aaron, what was your assessment here?
I want to follow up on that just a minute first. That I sat in a session with a watercolor artist a couple months ago when I was at the Sing conference with a group from the church and in Nashville, and she was talking about focus and how you achieve some things. But one of the things that she said that struck me was that you tend to always hit what you aim at. You always, whatever you're staring at, you will run into.
Right.
When you're driving along and you see that, you're like, don't hit that, don't hit that, don't hit that, and you focused on it so much, you wind up hitting it.
Right.
I find that on the bike a lot. There's that thing, and you're looking at it so much. But if you look at it in the context of what Bryan just said, that when I just am fixated on what is good and true and beautiful, I become more like it. I run into it, and that's what we should aim for those good, true, noble.
Just run into Jesus. Just run him right over.
Amen.
Love it.
Or let him run over you. Whatever it is. Where are fixing our eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith.
Yeah.
Just that idea that everything else diminishes.
Yeah.
So don't get tired of doing good. That's, that I want to sit with that for a minute, because sometimes it gets wearying. I think much of what we can be described as what we do vocationally is good work, and it's exhausting. And Paul is a hard worker, and he's just reminding us, this work that we're doing, this good that we're sowing is for the kingdom's sake. And that perspective, sometimes we're looking at our feet because we're working so hard, and to look up and miss the mountain that is before us, that this beauty and this awe and wonder. We should remember that God has called us to good work, and every seed that we plant, every row that we hoe or furrow is for this grand scheme that we get to be a part of.
Yeah.
And loving you should not be a burden. And when we tend to think of it that way, we need to remind ourselves of this, that we are doing kingdom work.
Me personally,
yes.
Or just loving me should not be a burden.
But I think your point there, right, is when we find trouble loving others, it's usually something within ourselves we need to reassess and deal with, rather than whatever's going on with the other person, right?
And could I just jump in there for just 1 second?
Do you love Aaron?
I'll answer it off air.
Okay,
I'll answer that off air. It's complicated, but no, of course, yes, I love you, but also,
it's
complicated. But anyway, when Paul talks about restoring one another gently, or a brother gently, but watch yourself, there was some kind of strain of teaching in the air, when I grew up, that said that watch yourself, or you may also want to do that exact thing that person's doing. So if that person is living in debauchery and you go to restore him, you may think, well, that debauchery looks pretty good. I'll join.
You may fall into that.
But but Paul, rather, it seems like in the context, Paul is saying, if you restore that person gently, but watch yourself. In other words, you may also fall into temptation. How are you going to restore this person, or what is your fellowship life like with this person? Do you now try to give this person a way to become more like you?
Right.
That's a temptation too. Become like me. Rather, let's, we can both follow Christ. I think that's more of where he's going.
I think you're right. I mean, there are occasions, though I think it's rare, where that happens, right? Where somebody goes.
Course, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
It is possible, and I've known a couple of folks where something like that's happened. But by and large, I think you're right. The greater temptation is for you to mistreat that person in the restoration.
So. Yeah.
And as you said, that as you restore them, there's this sense of pride in you.
Exactly.
Or
that's exactly
there
right.
is this sense of
policing now that you want to
policing them, right? And all of that is a far greater temptation than you probably falling into what they do.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Bryan, what question do you have of this text?
Well, my question, kind of arises out of that. How is my caring expressed for people? Mm-hmm. Have I written some people off in the fellowship? I know that I have. What am I going to do?
Well,
with that?
And to that point, it is interesting. When he ends this section that we're doing today, verse 10, that this care and our love for one another, it starts in the church itself.
Yeah,
and there should be deep care among one another inside the church, and that should be
and it
first and foremost, and should be the example of the love that flows outside of the walls.
Yes, that's
but
right.
It should begin inside the
right.
the walls. Right?
Who have I written off, and what am I going to do with that?
Yeah. Aaron, what question do you have of the text?
Well, I think just knowing just my own journey, just if I'm weary, if things are burdensome, then it's kind of an opportunity to do some self-reflection. Right. It's an opportunity to put my gaze on Jesus and say, reminding me of the privilege of the work that we've been called to.
And I love the analogy you used earlier about having some grand scene in front of you, like a mountain, and you're just looking down, toiling away. When you can look up and get a sense of the greater scale and the grander work of God, right? And sometimes we forget to look up.
Amen.
And I think we all fall into that trap. And we would love to hear your thoughts, too, as we begin Galatians 6, if you would comment below.